User UNFFWildcard has posted a 4-part video attempting to critique the evolutionary origins of morality offered in previous videos by the users Thunderf00t and Donexodus2. No introduction needed. While he offers some valid criticisms and interesting ideas about the origins of morality, I found myself somewhat perplexed by the narrow and sometimes obtuse path through evolutionary history that he takes, so I wanted to address a few of the pit stops along the way. First and foremost, when considering human morality, we have to start at the foundational aspect of our existence from which it derives, that being K-selection. Unlike insects, fish, crabs, and many plants, we and other primates, mammals in general, do not spam the environment with low-cost DNA vectors in the hopes that a token few out of dozens, hundreds, or millions will survive. We have few offspring and nurture these few to better ensure their survival. This means we can't be like dandelions and just let our seeds fall or trust our offspring to the whims of wind and insect pollination. We have to care about our offspring, and one should bear this in mind as we proceed. Regarding game theory versus benefits to the group. As a foil to Thunderf00t's and Don's statements that morality evolved because groups which cooperated out of group interest, Wildcard cites the somewhat vicious reproductive tactics of the langurs of Abu. Citing self-interest above group interest, Wildcard shows, convincingly, that this allegedly immoral behavior is not an example of group survivability, but rather individual survivability. And that's true. However, it's not fundamentally incompatible with the idea that individual behavior still shapes group outcome, nor that infanticide is acceptable amongst other primates. Human females, for example, would not tolerate some dude showing up, killing their kids, and then trying to sex them up afterwards. Consider if the langurs began to be selected for longer lifespans and longer corresponding childhoods. The cost of each individual offspring could said to be higher in terms of calories and attention required. This change would alter the internal selection mechanisms which currently allow the langur males to murder their breeding partner's offspring. Changing environments could alter any number of factors which would increase or decrease the reproductive effectiveness of such a practice. If the infanticide practiced by langur males became too costly to themselves or the mothers, it could destabilize the population or lead to extinction if those behaviors did not change. If the window of time in which offspring were killed and then born to the new dad took too long, for example, another male would simply come along and kill those babies, and so the cycle would continue with extremely negative consequences. The point of this is that all individual actions, however self-serving, are still fundamentally limited by species or group survival. Too many babies get killed or mothers start rebuffing the murderers, then the game changes and new selection pressures arise. It's not a far step over to the game theory analogy raised about piranhas and why they do not generally attack each other unless the risk is deemed worth it. These risks and whatever mechanisms in each piranha motivate them are acting at the individual level. However, individuals acting with simple rules about the world can combine and create that semi-mystical and tantalizing phenomena known as emergence. Much like a flock of birds or a school of fish, each following its own simple rules, reproductive habits can combine to forge novel survival strategies, and indeed, societies are built on them. Simply put, individuals acting on behalf of themselves can still influence the benefit or detriment of their species as a whole with little or no cognitive awareness that they are doing it. This is important, and when we get to humans, we'll come back to it. I also have to insert a general criticism of Wildcard's video series in that he seems to discount or ignore a few fundamental concepts, namely that exceptions do not disprove a rule or trend, and that evolution is neither binary nor monochrome. A single misstep is not always punished by extinction, and there are plenty of examples of weird and illogical behaviors that nonetheless exist and thrive in all species. Now, regarding the speculative nature of morality and the charge that we simply don't have the data, I can't disagree. We do not have a cohesive picture of exactly how and where morality arose in general or for humans in particular. However, if not by evolutionary means, what are we to accept? We don't know, so God did it? I think not. And as a professional anti-theist, I certainly hope this is not something Wildcard hoped to insinuate. What we know is that evolution is the most powerful force, in some ways the only force capable of changing and sculpting life. Biology shapes everything we do from conception to brain death, and the brain is no different than any other organ and is no less or more subject to selective pressure. We can look at our brain stems and the brains of reptiles to see differences in our impulses and survival strategies. We can compare the human brain to any other primate to see our own unique and gargantuan cerebrum sucking up calories at an alarming rate. And we have only to look around at our cities and civilization to see the value at such a wasteful configuration of neurons. At no point during the video series does Wildcard provide an alternative hypothesis to the origin of morality that excludes or diminishes the importance of evolution entirely. To this I ask, if not by evolution, how else could it have possibly happened? Obviously, I'm not prepared to admit that I know or that we may ever know the exact progression of events, but we know that we evolved, and that our morality is rooted deeply in our evolutionary past, and so it must have happened somehow. At the risk of committing a logical fallacy, I would say we don't know the particulars, but there is no other natural explanation that could account for the existence of a subset of neural processes within biological creatures running biological software in their biological brains. We don't know exactly how emotion evolved either, but we know that it did, that it serves a useful purpose, and that it's not 100% useful 100% of the time. Diving back into emergent behaviors, it shouldn't be difficult to contemplate the strange and complex happenings in a brain with 100 billion neurons. For example, the ability to pass non-genetic cultural information onto successive generations is a great rarity in nature, and no other species, primate or otherwise, can hold a candle to humanity in this regard. Nor could they hold a candle without opposable thumbs. Ha! When it comes to the moral choice scenarios and the infamous trolley example, again, I don't see how you can criticize morality for not being 100% utilitarian, knowing full well the examples of risk and game theory posed earlier on. You seem to hold out the trolley example as proof that morality could not have evolved for utilitarian purposes only, because half of those polled would not throw the switch. It seems almost too obvious to me why we see a lack of utilitarian behavior given what we know of individual or self-serving gains as they relate to morality. And bear in mind there is going to be variation among humans for any moral question posed, and no moral choice, no matter how absolute it seems, will be taken by 100% of humanity. Wildcard looks at the trolley example and says, well, if they don't kill the one person and let the 5 live, that's bad for the group. Consider the behavior of the human involved in the decision. They are the one who has to live with 2 terrible choices. 1, let 5 people die through inaction, or 2, become a murderer to save lives. Knowing full well that humans possess things like guilt, regret, remorse, and that the thought, is this behavior going to benefit or hurt humanity on the whole, rarely saunters through our conscious minds, what should the individual do that is best for their own well-being? Humans are not, by any stretch of the imagination, rational on the whole or all the time, but it's painfully easy to see why so many people would not either smother the baby in that example or push the fat guy over the rails. Because doing so would be murder, and murder is wrong. For the group, not a good thing, but for the individual, sickening as it may seem, that would be the course of least harm, not to the group, but to themselves. Ponder that for a moment. And I know I left a comment, but your example about suffocating the baby to death was practically trisomy G, like most cut-and-dry moral arguments. Because you can render a human unconscious by choking them until they pass out without killing them. To beat a dead horse now, the moral questions posed are pretty damn rare in nature. More often than not, we do not face life and death choices, but rather run through risk calculations. Take a group of 4 primitive hunters. They are miles away from their camp, and one of them is injured before they have killed anything worth eating for the day. Is it better for the 3 healthy hunters to carry the injured one back to camp and not eat for that day, or to leave him out in the wild at the mercy of some wild animals and or bad weather? Or should they just eat the injured man instead? I suspect most people would carry the man home and suffer slightly for it rather than just abandon a member of their tribe, family, species because they were temporarily rendered incapable. And having a general sense of compassion for fellow humans would, on the whole, be more beneficial to a tribe or village than if everyone were compulsively cutthroat all the time. Ironically enough, it could be a sense of compassion for the one victim that would allow people to choose the death of 5 over the one. It's not rational, but it's easy to see how an individual could not override their sense of compassion, even if the group as a whole suffers for it.